She'll put on the mask of indifference like it's armor. It's the first thing she reaches for when she senses the possibility of emotional vulnerability. And that's not because she doesn't feel anything. It's because she feels too much. The act of pretending not to care isn't born out of strength, but out of fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of needing someone who doesn't need her back. So instead of leaning in, she pulls away, not because you're unimportant, but because you might actually be. There's a psychological strategy at play here. One she may not even be fully conscious of. When someone pretends not to care, they're trying to regain control. They're trying to neutralize the perceived imbalance that emotions have created. You see, caring too much can feel like weakness to someone who's been hurt before. So rather than be vulnerable and open about how she feels, she builds a wall. She crafts this stoic version of herself, cool, detached, unbothered, as a form of self-preservation. And at first glance, it works. She can go on about her life, post on social media, laugh with her friends, and carry on as though you never had an impact. But that mask doesn't erase what's happening underneath. It just delays the confrontation. Pretending not to care is also a form of power play. It's a way to invert the emotional tension. By withdrawing her attention, she forces yours to grow, or so she hopes. The idea is simple. If she acts like she's unaffected, maybe you'll come back just to seek her validation. But what she doesn't expect is your silence. She doesn't anticipate that you'll actually stop chasing. And when that happens, her strategy starts to crumble. Because the illusion of indifference only works if it draws attention, not if it's met with complete detachment. Underneath the silence, her mind starts racing. She questions herself. Was she too cold? Did she push too far? Does he really not care at all? That internal dialogue starts quietly, almost as a whisper. But as time passes, the doubt grows louder. And no matter how strong the exterior, no matter how much she insists to her friends that she's totally over it, she's not. She's invested more than she wants to admit, and now she's trapped between her ego and her emotion. So when you walk away without anger, without drama, without a final word, when you just stop trying, she's left with the one thing her indifference can't protect her from, herself. And that's when pretending not to care becomes the very thing that haunts her. Silence has a peculiar way of amplifying what words try to conceal. When someone pulls away emotionally, but doesn't sever the tie completely, there's often a hidden hope that the other person will break the tension first. That's what's happening when she pretends not to care. There's a quiet expectation behind the performance. She might act like your absence means nothing, but in reality, she's watching, not openly, not in a way that's obvious, but she's paying attention. And every moment you don't reach out, it chips away at her narrative of control. You have to understand how difficult it is for someone to admit they care when vulnerability has cost them before. Maybe in the past she opened her heart only to have it mishandled. So now her defense isn't outright rejection, it's withdrawal wrapped in indifference. But the tricky part about this emotional theater is that it only works if someone plays along. If you break the silence, if you reach out, it reinforces her position of power. It tells her she's still on your mind, that you still care, that you're still emotionally available. But if you remain quiet, if you stay grounded and unmoved, that silence becomes deafening. She starts wondering what you're thinking. She might even begin to romanticize the connection. In hindsight, that's the paradox. Your absence becomes more meaningful than your presence once was. She doesn't hear from you, so she starts filling in the blanks herself. And it's in that vacuum that doubt begins to grow. It's no longer about whether she misses you. It becomes about why you don't miss her. That shift in focus is what drives her inward. It makes her question everything she once dismissed so casually. Even something as small as you not watching her story, not liking her post, not commenting. It begins to matter in ways she didn't expect. And she can't ask you about it because that would shatter the image she's trying to uphold. So she spirals inward, caught between wanting to keep the upper hand and secretly hoping you'll just say something to relieve the pressure. But the longer you stay silent, the more the silence speaks for itself, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in calm detachment. It sends a signal she wasn't prepared to receive, that you're not playing the game, that you've moved on, not out of spite, but from strength. And it's in that quiet space, that unspoken distance, where the truth finally confronts her. Your silence wasn't just the absence of words, it was the presence of self-respect. People tend to test boundaries often unconsciously, especially when they're unsure of where they stand with someone emotionally. When she pretends not to care, she's not only guarding herself, she's also watching you, observing how you respond, if you'll chase, if you'll validate her feelings without her having to admit she even has any. And when you don't react, when you stop playing into the loop of emotional reassurance, it creates a psychological imbalance she didn't anticipate. What begins as a performance of indifference slowly morphs into confusion, because in her mind, the script is predictable. She pulls away, you reach out, she gets to feel wanted without having to risk vulnerability. But when you break that pattern, when you refuse to beg, plead, or explain, it throws the entire dynamic into disarray. Suddenly, she's not the one orchestrating the emotional rhythm, you are, and not by manipulation or force, but by disengaging from the need for external validation. That shift creates tension, not just between you two, but inside her. She starts feeling restless. She questions whether you've really let go, whether you've moved on for good. And most importantly, she starts questioning whether the story she told herself, that she didn't need you, that she didn't care, is actually true. This internal tension is subtle but powerful. It creeps into her day-to-day thoughts. The absence of your attention becomes a mirror, reflecting back her own uncertainty. And the thing about mirrors is they're uncomfortable when you don't like what you see. She may even double down, post more, laugh louder, appear more unbothered, anything to convince herself and others that your silence has no effect. But behind that facade is a growing discomfort, because the more she performs, the more she realizes it's not getting the reaction she expected. Now, this doesn't mean she'll come running back, arms open, ready to apologize. That's not how these things typically unfold. But what it does mean is that the emotional leverage she thought she had is slipping. And that loss of control over the narrative, over your attention, over her own feelings, starts to weigh on her in ways she can't easily dismiss. You didn't argue. You didn't chase. You just stopped responding to a role that wasn't authentic. And that decision, that quiet act of self-respect, becomes louder than any words you could have said. Because in the end, the most haunting thing you can leave someone with is the silence that follows your decision to value your peace more than their performance. There's something about human nature that craves certainty, even in moments of chaos. But when that certainty disappears, when the person we assumed would always be there suddenly steps back, it leaves behind a void that's difficult to ignore. That's exactly what begins to unfold in her mind when you stop trying. Because as much as she might have acted indifferent, there was a quiet comfort in knowing you were still there, orbiting her world, waiting, however patiently, for the next signal. When you walk away from that dynamic, not dramatically, not with bitterness, just with quiet conviction, it forces her to confront the possibility that maybe you're no longer playing the game. And that's when doubt begins to creep in. She starts replaying conversations, revisiting moments, reading between lines that might not even be there, all because your absence has become louder than your presence ever was. It's not that she necessarily wants the relationship back in full. It's more complex than that. It's the pull of curiosity, the unease of not knowing what changed. Why did you stop trying? What happened inside you that allowed you to finally let go of the chase? These are questions she likely won't ask out loud, but she'll ask them internally over and over, because even the strongest facade can't suppress the psychological effect of being unexpectedly disconnected from the attention that once gave her control. It destabilizes the narrative she was relying on, that you'd always be there, that she could decide when and how things moved forward. When you remove that option, when you stop trying, it subtly communicates something powerful. That your value isn't tied to her acceptance. And that realization can be deeply unsettling for someone who's used to managing emotional dynamics from a place of advantage. It introduces insecurity, and in that insecurity, a flood of emotions begins to build, some that she never fully processed before. It's not just about you stepping away, it's about what that symbolizes. It represents her losing influence, her failing to predict your next move, and that unpredictability can drive her deeper into emotional conflict than any conversation ever could. She may not admit it, but she starts noticing you in your absence, not in grand gestures or nostalgic memories, but in the quiet moments. When she sees something that reminds her of you, or hears a song that replays a feeling she thought she had buried. The mind does that when there's unresolved emotion. And when you're no longer there to reinforce her illusion of control, her mind fills the gaps with questions, with regret, with tension she can't quite place. Sometimes walking away is more powerful than staying. Not because it punishes, but because it reveals. And what it reveals often haunts far more than any words ever could. When she notices that your life is moving forward without her, that's when the weight of everything starts pressing down on her. At first, she may try to act unaffected. She'll scroll past your name, skip over your updates, pretend that nothing about your presence or now your absence matters. But when she begins to see that you're no longer orbiting her emotional world, when she realizes that you're building something without needing her validation, that's when it hits. Because there's a subtle but powerful psychological shift that occurs when someone realizes they're no longer the center of someone else's focus, especially if they were used to holding that spot, intentionally or not. She might have taken for granted that you'd always try, always text back, always show interest, even when she pushed you away. And when that rhythm stops, when you start living without reaching back, she's forced to witness what she lost, not because you told her, but because you showed her. And it's not about making her jealous. It's about the undeniable human reaction to someone else's growth, especially when that growth wasn't supposed to happen without you. That's where the discomfort sets in, because your forward movement becomes a mirror to her own stagnation. She might see you laughing more, exploring more, looking more focused, more driven. Even if you're still healing, your silence, your distance, and your direction communicate that you're not emotionally stuck where she left you. And that realization cuts deeper than most people expect. It's often in this phase, when she sees you're no longer trying, that she begins to romanticize what once was. Not necessarily because it was perfect, but because it was predictable. And predictability gives people a sense of control. Now that she can't predict you, now that she can't gauge whether or not you still care, her mind starts to invent narratives just to make sense of the silence. Maybe you found someone else. Maybe you're finally seeing your worth. Or maybe, just maybe, you were never as attached as she thought. That last one tends to sting the most because it challenges the power dynamic. And if there's anything people struggle with more than heartbreak, it's losing the psychological upper hand. You were supposed to keep showing up, right? But you didn't. You recalibrated. You moved forward. And in doing so, you shifted the emotional weight back where it belonged, off your shoulders, letting her watch. You walk away and keep walking will tell her more than any argument or closure conversation ever could. And then there's the silence. Not the kind that screams for attention or tries to manipulate an emotional reaction. No, I'm talking about the calm, unwavering silence that comes when you've genuinely detached. Not out of bitterness, but out of growth. That kind of silence, the one that doesn't beg or chase or explain itself, begins to echo louder than any words you could have said. And it begins to haunt her in ways she didn't expect. At first, she might welcome it. She might even convince herself that it's exactly what she wanted, that your silence confirms her power, validates her distance. But that narrative starts to fall apart when she realizes the silence isn't a tactic. It's not temporary. It's not a strategy to win her back. It's real. It's the sound of someone who finally saw the situation clearly and chose peace over chaos. That's when her mind starts working overtime. Because what used to be predictable, your messages, your check-ins, your emotional presence, is now gone. And in that void, she starts hearing her own thoughts more clearly. The questions creep in, and the imagined scenarios begin to play out. Maybe she misread the situation. Maybe she pushed too far. Maybe the person she thought would always be there is truly done. And it's that possibility, the quiet realization that you're no longer emotionally invested, that begins to undo the walls she built. It's important to understand that people often underestimate the emotional impact of someone who simply stops reacting. When you don't explain yourself, when you don't defend your decision, when you don't try to make them see your worth, they're left alone with the consequences of their actions. That's far more powerful than a confrontation, because now there's no one else to blame. The silence doesn't give her an enemy to fight, a message to misinterpret, or a motive to dissect. All that remains is the absence and what it means. And you can be sure she feels it, even if she never says it. Even if she pretends she's moved on, the weight of that silence stays with her. Because at one point, you gave her access to the deepest parts of you. And now, without announcement or drama, that door is closed. That absence becomes the loudest reminder of what once was. And often, that is what drives her mad. Not that you yelled, not that you walked away angrily, but that you walked away in peace and didn't look back. That kind of silence doesn't just speak, it teaches.